Hello, everyone, and here we are once again, Life in Stages, the bi-weekly podcast where I, Joel Greenberg, have conversations with many of Canada's leading actors, directors, writers, people who have dedicated their careers to the performing arts. And I'm struck by the fact that so many people do, and it's always a curiosity of mine to know how people have endured, how they continue, where they started, all of that. And so I am really excited to be talking with Tracy Michailidis this morning. Hello, Tracy.
Hi, Joel.
Tracy and I have worked together a couple of times, but she's been working, as many of our guests have been, for quite a long time. So we're just going to talk freely and openly. And let's start, Tracy. I'm just curious, since this is something you've been doing your entire career, was this a part of your growing up, as a child or with a family? Was performance part of that?
I would say prior to performance, I was a huge reader. So I think the way I came into theater was just reading books and making plays in the backyard and things like that from books that I had read. I played Raggedy Ann when I was 6. My mom made my wig for me. And I have a friend now, we're still friends, 40 something years later, who says that her mom saw me in that wig and said, she's going places at 6. So I don't know. I mean, there's a video my mom has, and I look like I'm having a pretty good time.
Where was this production?
This was, I believe it was a school I went to called Mark Lee, which was, we grew up like Scarborough, and then we sort of migrated north to Markham. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a Mark Lee public school. Okay. And I had a great teacher, one of many. Her name was Mrs. Walker, who was really, who loved that I loved books and was the director of that play. Okay. I remember Joan Walker. And I had a great time doing it. And then, funnily enough, 30 years ago this summer, I did Anne of Green Gables, right? Another redhead. Mm-hmm. Another Anne with an E. And it was honestly what made me go to those auditions, which I crashed, I didn't have a time, was not necessarily that I wanted to be an actor, although I had done stuff. It was the book, and that book really was formative for me, as a kid.
Do you remember what it was about the book that spoke to you so deeply?
Yeah, it was that Anne, she felt things very deeply, and was like, had a sort of melancholy about her. When I read it, I mean, and I did too when I was a kid. Yeah. I always, I thought about life, I thought about death, I thought about, all of the different, like just the bittersweetness of life. And I felt a little bit like, my parents were immigrants. My great uncle was Telly Savalas, but aside from that, there was no one really in my family that was in the arts. Yeah. So I felt like a bit of a freak that way. And so I think feeling like some kinship with Anne helped me, like, honestly survive a little bit when I was younger.
Yeah. So the Charlottetown Festival, Anne of Green Gables, was that your professional debut?
It was.
Okay. Yeah. And had you between was it Raggedy Ann? Between Raggedy and the Ann with an E, was there a period of training or further development or opportunities to just explore what performing was for you?
Yeah, I did. I ended up going to Unionville High School, which had an arts program then for drama. Yeah. And I did that, and then really, so that program was great, but what was very formative to me was getting to do Into the Woods when I was in grade 12. So being introduced to Sondheim,
Yeah.
that particular show, which was very much an ensemble show.
Yeah.
And then a few months after I did that, I auditioned for a production of West Side Story that Chris Abraham was directing. I think Chris was 16 and I was 17. I really wanted to play Anita, but alas, I had to play Maria, which I ended up loving, but I thought, oh, that's the wimpy part.
You got all the high notes.
I did. Well, and I tell you, I had never sung high in my life. So I went through that score and I wrote down how many Fs, how many F sharps, how many G. I mean, I wrote it down and I practiced in my shower like for an hour a day with the water running. My mom would scream at me because I had never done it before. But that was very formative. The part, the show, the group of people that were assembled. I would say, as when I think of coming of age and all of those books, like that summer was that for me, emotionally, professionally. And it was when I thought, I think I maybe kind of want to do this. Now, having said that, because I was at an arts program and although I liked it, I felt it was quite narrow in its focus and I really liked academics. I decided to go to Queen's, which didn't have a BFA or an acting program. And I thought, maybe I'll be a lawyer and, get to act for fun. That didn't last very long after a couple of years. I was like, please. Then I went to play Anne and
I see.
I was grateful to come back to school, actually, to try different things and to make sure it was what I wanted to do.
Sure. So you didn't go through a sort of a professional training program. Is that right?
I'm an impostor. Yep.
Yeah. No, I'm asking because, there's a wide range from among the many guests on the podcast, plus, of course, the thousands of others who aren't yet attached. No, I mean, it is always interesting to me what a range, what the range is. And even those who have gone to, a conservatory program, those programs are so different from each other. So the range of what's, of how people find their way is fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, like, I was at school, with a really great group of artists, humans who I'm still close with, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was fortuitous that, I got to work with Chris when I was 17. I got to work with a great director when I was a teenager. When I was at Queen's, Daryl Cloran was at school with me and runs the Citadel now. And, we did a Brad Fraser play. And Tim Fort, who was my teacher, I went up to him and said, do you want to direct a Sondheim review, And we formed a production company at Queen's. So, I've never thrived in like competitive kinds of environments. I can be pretty hard on myself. I can provide lots of that for myself. But I really liked Queen's for that. And honestly, I just love the Ivy. When I went to visit too, I was like, the Anne of Green Gables in me, the White Way of Delight. I just romantically, it was the idea of what I thought a university should look like.
I share some of that because I've taught in a couple of different, I've taught both in the conservatory and sort of in a liberal arts world. And when I started teaching at the conservatory, I was excited about it because I'd never done that. And I very quickly felt that the bulk of the students were just too young. And the competitive aspect of it, that I don't like being here feeling that I have to be part of some final assessment that says you are worthy, you are not, which is how that program was run. And I think how a lot of theater programs are run. When I was a student, I remember being told that the aim of any legit theater training program is you get broken down so that you can then be built up, which I never understood. I certainly did not surrender myself to that philosophy. But then after being at the conservatory, I was at a liberal arts. The description of your experience at Queen's sounds so much like the experience I had when I was teaching at the University of Waterloo. And when I went there, I didn't even know I knew by the time I was going there, I knew they had a theater program, but I didn't know previously that they did. And it was exactly the same thing. Phenomenal students, tremendous curiosity, and a willingness to try just about anything. Whereas in the conservatory, there were students who were certainly very curious and very eager, but it was far, far less open. And you could just feel, I understood, because I'm sure as a student I was probably not that different, but you could feel the hunger for wanting to sort of be out there. And I want to get and several students who left the program said, I just want to get an agent and do commercials. And I said, well, that's probably what you should do. We don't teach that here, really. Anyway, back to Tracy. So then you started with certainly a legendary musical, and I know you've done a lot of musical theater, but I know you've also done non-musical.
After I did Anne, it was funny. I was 21, and then I went back to Queen's, right. And I thought I don't want to do the things that I want to do things that scare me. I'm in this insular environment, so I might as well try new things. So a friend of mine who was a director, I said, I want to do a Daniel McIver play. Yeah. So I did See Bob Run. Mm-hmm. That's what I did when I came back from it. And I was asked to do Kismet, I remembered. I thought, I don't want to do Kismet. I want to do Daniel McIver. Yeah. Yeah. So I was trying to do things that challenged me. I ended up doing Lion in the Streets that year as well, mm-hmm. which was great. And that, my training, if we're to call it like that, which I will say I have continued to study through the years. Yeah. I love taking class, but most of the training has been as an actor. Mm-hmm. And I think I knew, even at 21, I thought, I might get to work in musicals. So maybe I want to just do plays where I can, mm-hmm. and stretch myself that way, and practice singing. I said to you as a kid, I was a book reader. I was also like a huge Beatles fan, and I learned to sing listening to the Beatles, mm-hmm. listening to Madonna, listening to Joni Mitchell. That's how I learned to sing. Yeah. I love doing both. Yeah. I love when I've been through periods where I've just done musicals, I really crave what it is to do a play, and vice versa. Yeah. I miss singing. Yeah, no, I understand. I certainly understand the desire. And at the same time, I don't know if it's a dilemma, but the issue of actors rarely get to choose the projects they do. Sometimes you do, or you find a project and you bring it to somebody, as you said when you were at Queen's, when you brought the idea of a Sondheim review to Tim. But so many actors obviously want to be able to work across many styles, and typecasting in so many ways is what it becomes a kind of curse. Especially if you do something, if somebody meets you for the first time and you do it well, the assumption that is what you do. That's right. And I switched agents, I've switched agents a few times in my life for that reason, sometimes mm-hmm. saying, I don't want to do musicals right now. I feel very, privileged to be able to be working, mm-hmm. but I don't feel like I'm growing. Yeah. And that's part of the reason I got into this. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That's why Indecent, maybe we'll get to that, but I think it's such a beautiful piece because it's a play with music. Yeah. They're singing, but the script is so strong. Yeah,
it's a rare rare opportunity for anybody who throws themselves at it, because that's the only way you can get through it, or it certainly was the only way I could get through it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
me too.
Yeah. So here's something we haven't talked about. I say we, sort of in the larger podcast vocabulary, agents. And I know that there's a sense, certainly, I think probably somebody who has never had an agent, a young performer who is craving an agent because that's going to be the key that unlocks the entire career. And then at least then I realized that's probably not how it happens.
No.
So what is your experience with, how do you find an agent, and how do you establish how have you been able to establish relationships with the agents that have been, where it's been mutually beneficial?
Mm-hmm. Well, Tim Fort, who, we color in light in university, who's still a dear friend, he, when I got the Anna Green Gables job, I mean, the producer called me and was like, how about this much a week? And I was like, that sounds great. Like, I'll pay you, And so he sort of did a little bit of that. And then I got a national tour. And so Tim was a friend who was just acting as an agent. But I think because I began my career unrepresented,
right,
I think that had a mark on me, that I thought, I could do this by myself. I had agency, right? Which I, as a teacher, try to remind students of that we do have that, particularly in theater, I think in Canada, not so much with film and television in terms of getting in the door. So I did get an agent shortly after the tour, but I would say there have been big stretches in my life where I have not had an agent. When I feel like, and part of it, switching, was just me wanting different things, whether it was moving to New York or wanting to do TV and film and wanting to take a break from theater. So part of it has been what I've been interested in and what I feel like the agency's strengths are. I've also gone back to an agency when, their staff has shifted. I've shifted as well. I keep shifting, I think. I do feel what really matters to me is I love what I do, but my family is a huge part of my life. It always has been. And I do think there is a spiritual component to why I do what I do. And it's important for me that they understand that. So that feeds into, the kind of work I'm interested in doing. Yeah. Or if I don't want to be away from my family for this amount of time, and that is feeding me as well, so that they understand the life-work balance. And that shifts, that it continually shifts because of where I'm at, where my family's at.
Oh, sure. And we don't stay the same. Your needs, I mean, everything. We age, and everything changes. And so I think sometimes, I mean, I'm projecting again, but on myself, that you sometimes think you're going to hit a certain level or a certain point in your life, and then you just, like, you've hit it, and then that's it. The career, I'm on my way, and
oh yeah.
Okay, so You just mentioned when you do teaching, so let's talk about that a bit. When do you like to teach, and what do you derive from teaching?
So I like I was saying to you, I've been taking class for a long time, and when I was at Queen's, a lot of the students in my class were in the concurrent education program. So they were in the drama department to become teachers, not because they wanted to become actors. And I remember thinking, no, I'll never be a teacher, because honestly, I had a couple great ones like Mrs. Walker, and a couple whose words ring in my ears, not in a good way. And I just didn't want that responsibility. And, but I did take classes through my life. And I took a class when I was living in New York with Craig Carnelia, who's a composer, writer. And when I came back to Toronto, I really wanted to teach the class that I had taken. So I started teaching on my own. I just sort of put an email out. That was about 13 years ago. Okay. And I teach, I mean, it's sort of acting through song. I teach a few different things now, but mostly it's acting through song. It's storytelling.
Right.
And also, giving folks music that I think is good for them to sing, good writing. I mean, from when I was, a high school student at UHS, I would take the TTC and the Markham Transit to the reference library before the internet and pour through those scores and listen to records and this, encyclopedic knowledge of musicals that I could suddenly share and give to people. Yeah. So that's very joyous for me. I've been teaching on my own, sort of running my own private studio, but also I've been teaching for organization in New York. There's an organization called the Performing Arts Project that I've taught at for a few years in Winston-Salem in the States, and on a faculty now in Minneapolis as well in the Summer Institute. Is that the question you asked? Where do I?
Sure. No, I've got. Don't monitor yourself. Just.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I mean, I love. I started directing recently too, and I think I do love. And I've worked at restaurants. Like, I love hosting. I love making people feel like curating and making people feel like they can be safe to order whatever food they want or sing whatever notes they want, make a mistake, like feel free. I always, I was on student council when I was at Arts High School. I was president of my last high school. And I think part of it was like, let's bring karaoke into the cafeteria and get the rugby players to sing and really try to make it an inclusive experience. Because I think I went to an art school that Unionville had an art stream, right? So there were 1,200 students, but only a portion of us were in the arts program. Right. And though I loved it, and I think this is part of the reason I didn't go to a conservatory program, I felt like we were insulated from everybody else. I was really aware that friends of mine who were curious about the arts didn't want to walk through the drama hall or the music hall because it felt, like a snob. And so that's been definitely, when I look at my life, I think it's been a bit of a mission of mine. And so even with my class, there have been folks who've taken my class who are not doing this for a career, but it's a passion or a vocation or something they did when they're younger. And I have to tell you, Joel, like those classes, when people come in who have very different experiences, are so rich because of the different stages that people have gone through and what we bring.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks. That's really helpful because I've certainly done a lot of teaching too, and it's a lovely opportunity. I mean, what I get from it, I guess, most of all, is the freedom to not be tied to a deadline of any kind. So when you and I have worked together, I think maybe one of the hardest things I have as a director is to let the stage manager handle all of the scheduling and timing and try to free myself from feeling I've got 15 minutes or 20 minutes and this is what's on, this is what I'd like to get through. And I know that I'm not always very good with that, getting through the checklist, getting through the day can more than sometimes overwhelm like the ease. And in a teaching situation, there's no rush. And I have found that very both helpful and therapeutic. And now you've made several references to being in New York, and I know you're back and forth a lot. So when did that happen? When did New York become part of your life?
Well, when we had just finished doing Into the Woods when I was 17, that was the first time I visited. We went on a bus trip there. And I loved it. I also was a big Sesame Street fan. So I really feel like I trace it back to Sesame Street and just the brownstones and, the lore of New York. Yep. It's always pulled me. And then I had done the national tour of Beating the Beast and they asked me to come to New York. So that was my first very lucky. Like I went there as 27, yeah, to do Beauty and the Beast there for a few months.
Okay.
Loved living there. I had done the tour. So to be honest, when I was doing the show, it was a little anticlimactic. I sang "I Need 6 Eggs," which, is quite an exciting line in the opening number, Val. But then I left to go to the Shaw Festival, because I was really excited about that. And I do remember thinking, am I making a mistake? Like, I'm here in New York, but it was a sliding door moment. But I felt quite strongly that I wanted to come back. I'd always wanted to work at the Shaw Festival. And then a few years later, I was just feeling like I'd never been someone who'd had a bucket list, like this is where I want to work. But I did feel like, starting with Anne, I mean, I remember at 21 going, oh my God, it's all going to be downhill. Like, how do I top this? Might as well just, but having gotten to work at the festivals and having, the Broadway thing, I remember thinking, like, now what? Like, where do I go? It's not necessarily a linear thing. But I loved New York City. I love New York City, Joel. And I just wanted to I wanted to be a New Yorker.
Yeah.
Wonderful Vern Thiessen, a playwright who I'd done his play Apple at the Prairie Theater Exchange. He was living in New York when I went to visit. And I remember he took me to dinner at the Cornelia Street Cafe, where when I had been doing Beauty and the Beast before then, I used to go to the cabaret space downstairs and listen to the Greek American Poets Society. I would go, and he took me for dinner there, and we had such a great time. I bumped into Mandy Patinkin coming out of the bathroom, who had Schmutz on his shirt. He's like, I got Schmutz. I mean, it was just, one of those New York times, and the bartender was talking about something, and I said, Vern, if I get my green card, this is where I want to work. I don't care about Broadway. I've done Broadway. I want to work at this cafe. Because I just decided I wanted to change, and I wanted to try living in New York. Yeah. And when I had been doing the Broadway show, right, I was on a visa for that show. Right. So I was Disney's. And I wanted to just live there as a person. And so I got my green card, and I got a job at that cafe, which was one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life, for so many reasons.
Can you tell us some?
Okay, well, it was Cornelia Street. The cafe is closed now. It closed just a year before COVID. Yeah. 40 years, though. It had a 40-year run. And Cornelia Street, for anybody who knows, is like a block, right? It's a block long between Bleecker and West 4th.
In the village.
Yeah. So there's that. Like, you're at this beautiful little intersection, and the people that walk through those doors were New Yorkers who'd been living in that neighborhood, who were in their 80s. You had some tourists. You had artists.
And Mandy Patinkin.
And Mandy Patinkin. Yeah. I mean, got to have a great chat with Sarah Bareilles. Sweet Meryl Streep came downstairs with her husband to watch some music. But it didn't feel, it's so hard to explain. It was just it made me feel like I belonged in a way. And I also think there's something about a restaurant, right? Like, it's very much like a theater. There's the backstage, there's the crew, the chefs, and the kinds of people I met were people that maybe I wouldn't have been friends with in life had I just, in the industry that I'm in, but people who became very close to me. Yeah. And I'm still close to a lot of those folks. They also, there was a cabaret space downstairs, and that's when I started singing. I started doing a couple cabarets down there. So creatively, there was that. I met some friends that are still my friends today. Yeah. And, I think in that city, it just felt like, I used to call it to my friends, like, it almost felt like a kind of church. It felt like a place that I belonged, and also, served great wine and good food. And my friends who are coming through the city, I would say, come to the restaurant. And I had a wonderful boss. And it was just very, again, a sort of other coming of age
Yeah. Yeah.
moment
Sure.
for me. I was there on the closing day, and I got to serve on that last day, which was very,
That's wonderful.
yeah,
So, okay, so you have this, you get your green card and you're able
yeah,
to actually work where you wanted to work in the cafe. And
yeah.
what is professional life like now that you are in the city that you really want to experience and feel a part of?
Do you mean now or then when I got my
Then,
green?
I mean,
Then.
it'll be both, but certainly when you're starting
Mm-hmm.
in New York,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess at the same time, has it changed? Because it's been quite a number of years,
Yes. Yep.
and we change, everything changes, right? So
Everything.
So I'd be. It's fascinating to know what what your initial, your memories of that initial period, and how that has developed rather than changed.
Yeah. And I mean, I will quote Rilke and say that I'm still living into the answer, like of
Yeah,
that question. I'll say on some, I definitely feel like that's a question I continually ask
sure.
myself. I think initially, being there, it was great, like to take certain classes, to see shows, and to audition for stuff. And I did have an agent there. I did book a couple like off Broadway shows. From open calls, which was great, which I think was really exciting for me. Of course, as luck would have it, as soon as I moved there, like I started getting all this work up here in Toronto.
Yeah,
So there was a lot of that was happening.
yeah,
And dating people who lived in Toronto, like
yeah.
this was just part of the balance. So there was that. And then I guess, so I was 35. Yeah. So I started working here. I did some shows there. And then just family stuff. My grandma, well, when we were doing Parade,
Yeah.
Joel, like my
Mhm.
grandma was quite sick. She passed away soon after.
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, it's now that you've mentioned it.
Yeah.
I had two friends who were at the performance of Parade, that where the performance sort of ended moments before the
Yes.
the
Yes.
ending, and one of them who knows Parade very well said, and this has nothing to do with your grandmother, but it's the timing that's the same. He said it was wonderful to see Parade where he actually survived.
That's a happy ending.
Yeah, and I thought that was a sweet way of acknowledging that that the show didn't end that night. But yes, I remember that I certainly remember that.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I remember we were all singing the old red hills of home, and my grandma was in the front row. And yeah, I thought this is probably the last show she's going to see of mine. And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to get through the show. Like,
Yeah,
I don't think I can look at my grandma too much.
sure.
And of course, yeah, like, so that was, so that happened. And, I'm the oldest in my family,
Mhm.
and I've always felt a strong sense of that. I'm going to go back to Anne of Green Gables. And I mean, this is a
Mhm.
big reason why I think the story endures, and why, one of the reasons they say that, in Japan,
Mhm.
where they flew my mom and I when I was playing Anne, she's so popular because she's both has ambitions and drives, and she's intelligent, but she also has a strong sense of family.
Mhm.
She stays with Marilla. So yeah, I moved to New York. I was coming back and forth. Um, things don't go the way you plan. But one of the things that happened when I was working at that cafe
Mhm.
is there was a gentleman who was a playwright there who said, "Hey, I'm workshopping a show of mine at New Dramatists in New York," and so I ended up getting to do some work at New Dramatists,
Mhm.
and meeting a friend who is now kind of a mentor, who brought me to Minneapolis.
Mhm.
So this is like our owner used to say the cafe, the sort of tagline was like where the world passes through.
Yeah.
And that, to me, working at New Dramatists, the few times that I did work there, I would say arguably the most creatively fulfilling work I
Mhm.
got to do there. That space is dedicated to the playwright and
Mhm.
to you were talking about teaching without having to do a grade or or like a deadline.
Yeah.
And that's all that work was about.
Yeah.
And I think that was really formative because, I don't know if you remember, for a few years, I did this series at SummerWorks called Musical Works in Concert.
Yeah.
It helped develop new musicals in Canada. And I would say getting to be at New Dramatists was formative in that. And I think New York started to feel like a school almost, where I would learn things and then apply those lessons here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got to work. I mean, when I was at Stratford, Uta Hagen was there, and I took class with her.
Right.
And then I went to HB Studio and got to work with Austin Pendleton and Carol Rosenfeld and great teachers who then I brought those things back to Toronto when I started teaching here. So it feels like that. And now, to your question about now, I still have a place in New York. When COVID hit, like I just didn't go back. I didn't go back. I didn't want to quarantine for 14 days. And, and I will say, having been back and forth, one of the gifts it's given me is appreciating what we have here in Canada, what I have here in Canada.
Okay. And what is that?
Yeah. Well, healthcare, there's that.
Yeah.
A certain, also just recognizing a certain history, like that I have with people, with the community.
Yeah.
So that's something. I do have friends that I've had for years in New York as well, but that there is a real sense of, like, it can feel frustrating, I think, in Canada because it doesn't necessarily feel like you're ascending. I remember Michael Terrio telling me years ago that William Hutt had told Mike about Canada and how, it's not, again, like ascension, it's almost like lateral movement, that it's not, and that can feel frustrating, but also kind of expanding because you're not, chasing after this prize that, when you get there, it's like, now what?
Yeah.
So I feel that in Canada, and I think it's so hard to explain. I feel like a New Yorker in a lot of ways, I have to say. And when I worked at the diner, like the highest compliment was people saying, "Oh, I thought you were a New Yorker." So, yeah, it was high praise for me.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know, it's so hard to explain, but I also think, having been there, I also recognize that I feel Canadian.
Yeah. 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 So you currently, I mean, you're still going back and forth.
Not as much.
Okay.
As I was.
Yeah.
Not as much. As
okay.
I was.
Okay. Yeah. I when my older daughter was in New York studying theater, before that, I mean, she was auditioning for schools, and my wife happened to be there on one of the days when she had an audition, and she went with her. I mean, she was obviously not going into the audition with Jess, but she was there, and so was a friend of Phyllis's. And as Jess went into the audition, the friend said, in an approving way, she said, "She is so Canadian," and she said, "She's so lovely," and she said, and looking at everybody else who was sort of in the room waiting to go in, Phyllis said, you just knew that it was different. That the energy was from, I guess, certainly from the Americans, who were either more accustomed to whatever the routine is or just the vibe. That you just knew you were in somebody else's place.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I will say, when I was, there is a generosity that I have felt, not to say that Canadians don't have this, but an effusiveness that when I've been in the States, like in shows, like people are like really celebrate each other.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes as actors, we can ask ourselves questions like, what makes me special or unique or, and so there is something, kind of when I went to New York or when I was in shows, I was the Canadian. So I didn't have to think about being different because I just was.
Yeah.
And this ineffable thing that maybe they could put a finger on. I remember doing, I played Yum Yum in the Mikado in Vermont at the Weston Playhouse, and one of our stage manager's partner came to see it, and he said, your voice, like there's something about what you do that is just different than in America. It's the way that you sing and the way that you is just, it's not this sort of the sound that I'm used to hearing. It's just different.
Yeah.
But to my ears, I didn't know what that meant. So
yeah. All right. Well, here's a shift.
Okay.
I know that all of us at various points don't get the work don't get work. The work we most want, and I have to assume, though I haven't done a clinical study of your of your life. Undoubtedly, there are periods where it's just not happening, or they refer to it's sort of dry, right? And what's that like? I mean, how does one learn to live with that without it somehow, damaging you? And with all of the insecurities, I think that every artist has, without it being sort of feeding that and encouraging that.
Right. It's a great question. It takes a lot for me to be bored. I was one of the, I know that when the pandemic hit, I will say I was grateful for a rest. I love teaching. So I've been teaching, and I will, if it's the right place, like work at a restaurant, because I feel like both of those things keep me connected to myself, and also to, on some level, like serving. I do feel like as an actor, that's what I'm doing. I'm serving the script. I'm part of something that's bigger than me. And so I feel like with both of those things, I get to do that. They both expand my sense of self. And I would say that's what drew me to acting in the first place. Like when I talked about reading books.
Sure.
So it's very liberating to me to be able to not feel like I have to rely on the phone to ring, the email to get that job, to feel a sense of worth.
Good.
I mean, it's funny. I didn't start waitressing till I was in my 30s. I was very, lucky in my 20s. I worked as an actor. I had lots of friends who were doing it. But I remember distinctly this moment of feeling a connection with the client, with a customer, and thinking, and I haven't done anything. Like I haven't sung a note, I haven't acted, and for me, where they're just connecting, we're connecting because I don't have to do anything, and that was very profound for me. Sometimes I feel like in the past when I'd met my brother's partners and they'd seen me in a show, like I felt like there was a little bit of we just weren't balanced because they'd seen me on stage and in makeup and singing, and I just wanted to talk to them as a person on their levels. So I do love that. And as somebody who, I think of myself as a seeker, teaching is great because I get to take class, I get to be a student. So I'd say those two things help me a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And pay rent too. That's helpful.
Well, sure. I mean, I think one of the challenges always is to be able to not let the focus be, how am I going to get through the month? I mean, that's going to be there. And it's foolish to say that people don't think that way or have that as a priority. But if that isn't the engine, then it's a lot healthier, and doesn't become, I think sometimes it can really narrow your world when that's the dominating thought. Yeah.
And I do think like that idea of do what you love and the stuff will come to you. Like I have found, even though it can get harder as I get older, acknowledge that anytime I'm gripping, about anything, like whether it's work or personal life, like things will stay stuck. And once I release and let go, things come.
Yeah.
So I just have that principle sort of energetically, and, you know, working at that cafe, meeting that playwright, coming, like those kinds of things
Yeah.
dovetailing into each other,
Right.
um, has
Yeah.
helped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned there have been a few moments in your life that you've referred to where there have been mentors or people who have been pivotal in moving you forward or in triggering something that takes you somewhere else.
Mhm.
Can you think? I mean, can you tell us about one or a couple of moments or people? I mean, you certainly did with getting to Minneapolis, right?
Mhm.
How somebody saw you and that became, you know, they found you, right? In a sense.
Yeah, they came to see, they were in Toronto, and then they watched a class that I was teaching.
Right.
And that's when they said, yeah, you should direct. And that's how I started doing that.
So are there other people that you can refer to?
Well, aside from Tim Fort
Right.
that I spoke about, I will say, just like in I had, when I was on tour with Beating the Beast, our head of wigs, his name was Dale, had worked with Charles Durning and Julie Harris, who were at the time doing the Gin Game in Chicago. And we went to the show, and we went for drinks after with Julie. And she was remarkable. I mean, I knew a little bit about her career, but I loved the play Member of the Wedding. It was always a dream of mine, and which she originated the role in. I brought my script, and we talked, and we were pen pals for years after that. And I think Julie inspired me. She was kind of a beacon to me because she was so kind. And I think I had this idea in my head that in order to, quote, make it or be famous, like you had to be hardened, or I don't know, like I just imagine like Dorothy Parker. Everybody was going to be, I'm not Dorothy Parker. But Julie was just, her spirit, her kindness, her generosity was just a light, like I say, a beacon to me.
Yeah.
And so even though we just wrote to each other for a few years, so that was somebody. And I will say, when I applied for my green card, another person who had been sort of a beacon to me was the opera singer Teresa Stratus. And I found out that my grandmother, when she moved to Greece, was taking singing lessons with Teresa's teacher.
Wow.
And my grandmother had the opportunity to go to New York, to the Met, I think, for some singing competition. And she didn't go. She ended up not going. Teresa did, of course, and had a wonderful career. But again, I think, because she was close to my family. And also, when I was growing up, like, I didn't see any Greek last names in the programs to the plays I'd go to. So she made it feel possible. And I had found out through a singing teacher that she had a place in New York at a hotel. And so I wrote her over the years. And she called me. She called me, years ago, out of the blue. Well, I put my number in the letter, and we ended up having this like couple-hour conversation. And she really supported me spreading my wings, because honestly, I felt like, am I being a bad Canadian by going to New York?
Yeah.
But she helped me not feel guilty about that. And the next day I got my approval.
Wow.
So it felt like a bit of a sign.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's pretty that's pretty magical.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Before we are done, we still have a little bit of time. Let's you talk about Indecent. I mean, you mentioned earlier, we'll get to it. So let's.
Oh gosh. I mean, it's such a special play. I was so happy to work on it. I think you know this, Joel. Like, I had an audition for it years ago before it came to New York at the Yale Rep.
Oh no, I didn't.
Yeah, I still have the original email, and I remember it was for the same part that I played.
Okay.
But I thought, I'm not butch enough. Like, I don't think I'm right for this. And I was in Vermont at the time. So I said to my agent, can I just send a self tape? And if they don't think I'm right, like, I won't come in. Anyway, they did like the tape, and I came in, and Rebecca Teichman was there, the director, and I did not get the part. But I remember thinking, this is special. This is a special show.
Yeah.
I knew it. And so I still remember distinctly the audition for U2 and Mark McGrinder being the reader. I remember Mark there. And I mean, I loved it. As you know, I think both of us were going through some family stuff at the time. So that made it more challenging and more rich at the same time.
Yeah. No, it was I appreciate you saying that, because it was sort of a wonderful, horrible time. It was certainly the first thing I had done since the lockdown, and we were working still under very weird, sort of rules and restrictions, so that, do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? And what do you do? And, there will be no opening night. There will be no formal opening night party, because if anybody gets sick, I mean, the show will just stop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, the 6 weeks that we had to figure it out and wrestle the play. I mean, it's an extra. I knew when I first read it. Actually, I first saw it, and I remember my initial response was I said, I'm not really sure what this play is about, because it's about so many things. And that I could never get past that. And I think when I first said, what's it about? I was being critical, like in a negative way. I said, a play has to be about something. And the more I thought about it, I said, no, it is. It's about many things. And a play can also be about many things. And, and that was something, having the time in rehearsal to really absorb that. And the play is so dense, and the music, I mean, everything about it. Plus, doing it when many people were still too nervous to be in a theater.
Yes.
And my, I know certainly my preoccupation with, let's get to the end. Let's get to the end. Let's get to the end. Probably wasn't always the most freeing environment in which to work.
Yeah, but that piece is so, I get that though, because the piece is so sprawling and yet focused at the same time.
Yeah.
And I mean, there've been a couple times that I did Mr. Burns, a post-electric play with Outside the March, where I thought, I don't fully understand this, but I think this is why I need to do it. And I felt like with Indecent, there have been a few of these in my life where I could have run that show for months and months because I kept learning things. And there were things that I found, like I never quite, I put in air quotes, got, but that's what encouraged me to keep going and try to figure it out. And I do think, it was such a weird time with COVID. And also, as you know, like my brother had basically a terminal diagnosis during that time and got very ill and was hospitalized when we were running the show. But I did think but this is like, I'm doing a show. This is what this show is about. Like, it is life and death. This is what the stakes of this are real. And I'm doing something I love. And so it was okay to keep doing the show. There was a release in it, and it just felt right. Like I thought if I was doing a farce right now, maybe it would be harder to slam the door exactly right. But in this, to dance in the rain, I'll do that.
I remember the first preview or the dress, whatever. The first time we had an audience, I remember the potent feeling of seeing so many people wearing masks. And although I probably I wasn't even thinking about that until there they were in the theater. And I remember saying to Rebecca, who was directing it with me, I turned to her and I said, oh my God, this is so sad, and it's so quiet. And I can see people talking to each other because you couldn't hear them. And I thought, how are what is this going to be like for the actors? I mean, you've got these people staring at them with these mostly white masks on, and you're going to have to wait until the very end to find out whether they were there the whole time or not. It was weird. It was just so weird. And I was so grateful for the absolute embrace of the company in spite of, or maybe because of, the moments that weren't so much fun.
Oh yeah, it was you assembled a very special group. I mean, the musicians, the actor, it felt like a family.
Yeah.
And I do think, it was so great too. I love that Studio 180, the engagement with the audience and the talkbacks we had, because that was when we really got to hear what people thought, and there was so many very interesting points that came up and people wanted to discuss after that play.
Yeah.
I do feel like I remember doing Parade, and somebody in a very emotional part, opened a bag of Smart Food and was eating it in this first row. But I have to say, for me as an actor, those things, it helps me, because I just think it helps me not take myself quite as seriously.
Okay.
And just go, this is a play. And so with Indecent, with the masks, I did feel like this is just looking out at the sea of white masks, but okay, in a way, it's not perfect, right? So therefore, we're just going to see what happens. I mean, there are laughs in Indecent. I think if it was a farce, it would be harder. Right. I think because people, I do think, felt more private about those kinds of things and responding.
Oh, sure. Well, I'll always be grateful that we got to do it, and because it had been stopped, was it April of 2020? One day I remember when Jordan was still involved in the show, he called me and said, with other things closing down, he said, do you think that we're going to be doing the show? Of course, I said, of course we are. Oh, come on. And the next day, I said, well, we're going to, I'm going to have to retract that very positive, clearly uninformed, assertion that nothing was going to stop the show. And at that point, even though, Mervish Productions said, we're going to delay it. And I thought they were being kind, and maybe they were. I mean, nobody knew. So I am deeply grateful for the fact that we got to do it, and that you and I and the others got to do it together. So I thank you. And I thank you for joining Life in Stages, and for sharing.
I never got to ask you. I thought I'd get to ask you a couple questions.
What would you like to know?
Well, I just want to know, in this stage, you are no longer the artistic director of Studio 180. This is a new stage for you. How does it feel? I saw that you just had your anniversary, by the way. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. That was yesterday.
More time with your grandkids?
Yeah. And, it was a little more than a year ago when I stepped down. And I know that Phyllis was very concerned about how much time I would have on my hands. And I said, well, I've been doing this for a very long time. And the first thing I need to do is find out what it's like not to be doing this. And I can't, it's going to take time. And it did. And it was much fear. I am very happy that others now have to take on the tasks that nobody, well, I guess very few people really enjoy, such as fundraising and politics and the way in which the arts and the performing arts in Canada, maybe certainly Toronto, which is what I know, are often tenuous. During the pandemic, I was really struck by the fact that we did a lot of digital programming, and that was thanks to Mark, because we had never done most companies had never done that. And we had a really good listenership and really good support. And then as soon as people started going out again, we certainly reduced the amount of it, but I am still so struck by the fact that theater, like the performing arts, made itself available globally, and for much of it at no cost, or at very, very limited cost. And now it's, in some ways, feels to me, I don't know if this is accurate, but it feels to me as though that period really never happened. And so even with Studio 180, when we were doing Indecent, people said, "Oh, the tickets are so expensive." I said, "No, I mean, people do get paid, and bills get paid. Why should this be? Why should this be free? How this can't be free? And why does it have less value now? Because you're going to spend a whole lot more for so many other things." So that I'm glad to be able to observe that rather than to feel that I'm in some way in the middle of it. That's good. And then this podcast is really, as somebody said, it's a passion project, because the aim is I'm not monetizing it.
Yeah.
It's, I'm not trying to start a business. I'm aiming, Mike is taking care of, all I have to do is talk and try to think and provide some copy at some point. But I'm not going to be looking at analytics daily and saying how many views are there. I'm sure I'll want to know that. When you do a play, I think you want to have an audience. It doesn't have to be in a 2,000 seat theater, but you don't want to feel that you're doing this in a vacuum. Of course. But I'm not, I wanted, so this is absolutely pleasurable, and I want it to continue to be. When I started this, I thought, well, most podcasts I listen to are weekly, so I'll do it weekly. And then I thought, if I have to do something every week, I said, I'm sure I could do it, but it's going to turn into another job with schedules and the anxiety of going into rehearsal tomorrow and all those things that you can't ignore or avoid. And sometimes they're actually helpful, and sometimes they make you crazy. So, so I'm aiming to not bring that along with me. Thank you for asking. Anything else?
You're welcome. No, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you, Joel.
Okay. No, it's a real pleasure. And I'm also thanking all of you who are listening. If you're new to Life in Stages, know that it is a bi-weekly podcast. So every other week, another wonderful guest will be joining us and talking in conversation. Those of you who are returning and have heard us before, thank you so much for your support. Speaking of support, if any of you would like to or would consider making a donation as a way of managing and supporting the podcast, please go to patreon.com, patreon.com/lifeinstages. The instructions are very clear. All donations are really deeply appreciated, because that's how we will keep the podcast moving on. Thanks again, and please let all your friends know as well. Tell everybody you know. Tell everybody you meet today. You can get Life in Stages at wherever you get your podcasts, and I look forward to seeing more of this and hearing more of this. And Tracy, have a good day.
Thank you, Joel.